Okay, so today, Special Counsel Jack Smith asked Judge Tanya Chutkan to dismiss the federal election interference case against Donald Trump. And here's what Jack Smith wrote in his filing. He wrote, quote, "The government's position on the merits of the defendant's prosecution has not changed, but the circumstances have. The Justice Department's position is that the Constitution requires that this case be dismissed before the defendant is inaugurated." Now, shortly after that, Smith moved to dismiss the classified documents case against Trump on the same ground. Now, we kind of knew this would be the inevitable outcome of a Trump victory, if there was a Trump victory, because he effectively ran out the clock before winning the election. But for all of you out there who have been following these cases very closely over the course of the last few years, as we all have been, it still might feel kind of jolting in this moment, especially to those of you who thought there would be accountability here, real accountability. Because we know there are aspects of this that could have played out differently. So I was thinking about this today, and I really wanted to just take a step back and walk through how we got here. And I was reminded a lot of this myself, especially when it comes to the sobering dismissal of the case centered around January 6th. So you may not remember this detail from the day, and I was already in the transition, and I don't even remember this detail of the day until today, but early in the afternoon of January 6, 2021, news broke that then-President-elect Joe Biden would nominate Merrick Garland to serve as his attorney general. And a Biden official told NBC News at the time that his Justice Department nominees affirm Biden's commitment to restoring independence and integrity to the Justice Department. A very important message, of course, at the time and any time. Now, I happen to know that Biden picked Garland in part because he wanted somebody who was apolitical, who was above the fray, someone who would do things by the book. And all of that sounded great, at least on paper. Of course, on that same day, just a couple of hours later, rioters would breach the barriers leading to the U.S. Capitol, the culmination of a months-long attempt by Trump to steal the 2020 election. And in the immediate aftermath of that day, there was definitely a demand for accountability, which was a good sign. I mean, just 1 week later, Trump was formally impeached by the House for inciting an insurrection. But by the time his Senate trial was underway, just a month later, it was only a month later, Republicans got cold feet. And I think we all know how that ended. Now, during that Senate trial, just before Trump was acquitted, Trump's lawyer, his lawyer, Bruce Castor, said something that has really stuck with me, especially in this moment.
After he's out of office, you go and arrest him. So there is no opportunity where the President of the United States can run rampant in January, the end of his term, and just go away scot-free. The Department of Justice does know what to do with such people.
Now, a version of that was also McConnell's argument, reportedly, to Republican senators, who he tried to convince and convinced to vote against impeachment. But yeah, that was Trump's attorney basically inviting prosecutors to indict his own client. It was and remains a pretty stunning thing to hear. It seemed a sure bet to everyone that the DOJ would, in fact, hold Trump accountable. But as the Washington Post later reported, more than a year would pass before prosecutors and FBI agents jointly embarked on a formal probe of Trump's attempt to steal the election. Now, instead, as we all know, the investigation started out by focusing almost entirely on the rioters themselves. It's also not at all unusual for prosecutors to start at the bottom and work their way up. But in this case, the clock was ticking. I mean, in the meantime, the bipartisan House Select Committee on January 6th was taking matters into their own hands. They collected data, announced subpoenas, interviewed witnesses, and held major primetime hearings, all focusing on Trump, the top, and those in his orbit. As the New York Times put it at the time, their work effectively dialed up the pressure on Garland to move more aggressively. And it kind of seemed to work. I mean, as the Washington Post reported at the time, grabbing news accounts about the committee's discoveries fueled public criticism that the Justice Department appeared to be lagging. So there was growing pressure on the department. And then Trump announced his candidacy for president, prompting the appointment of Jack Smith as special counsel. Smith notably vowed that the pace of the investigations will not pause or flag under my watch. And he delivered on it. I mean, within a year, he brought an indictment against Donald Trump for attempting to overturn the 2020 election. So that was in August 2023, more than a full calendar year before the 2024 election. But we now know that didn't leave Smith nearly enough time to complete his job, thanks in large part to, guess what I haven't talked about yet, the Supreme Court. In October, of 2023, Trump's team filed a motion to dismiss this case, which kicked off a months-long back-and-forth battle in the courts, totally unnecessary. They could have decided much faster. It delayed the trial, delayed justice, and it culminated, of course, in the Supreme Court's decision to grant Trump presidential immunity. That ruling not only set a dangerous precedent where a president exists above the law, in a realm kind of more like a king than a commander-in-chief, it also almost guaranteed a trial would not be able to take place before the election. And as we now know, it didn't. Trump won the election. He is now the president-elect. He has shed the serious criminal cases, for the most part, that have dogged him for years. And after this news today, in all likelihood, he will be more emboldened, even more certain he can avoid accountability, with the goal of appointing a number of people to lead the Justice Department who are loyal to him. Look, as we're digesting all of this, this is a long and winding road between January 6, 2021 and today. So many little things could have gone differently to come to a different outcome, maybe, than the one that was reached today. And for those who followed the norms, respected the traditions, honored the protocols, colored inside all of the lines, kind of begs the question, is that how things should happen moving forward? Is that the best way to operate when you're dealing with a president-elect and a political movement that does pretty much the exact opposite? I'm not quite sure how to answer all of those questions, but I have the perfect person to ask, who happens to be sitting here with me on set. So joining me now is Senator-elect Adam Schiff of California. He was a member of the House Select Committee that investigated January 6th. So this was some big news, not unexpected news necessarily today, but you were here just yesterday, and you were asked what you thought should happen with these cases, and you said that the cases shouldn't be dismissed. They should be deferred until after he leaves office. Does that mean you think there was an alternative to what Jack Smith did today?
Yes, I think there was an alternative. The alternative would have been to postpone further proceedings in the case until after he left office. Now, what Jack Smith did is seek to dismiss the case without prejudice. That means they can bring charges against Trump again once he leaves office. But it is nevertheless a very serious distinction, because the status quo now is no charges against the president. You would have to upset that status quo to later bring charges again, as opposed to merely postponing the proceedings, in which case the presumption is they continue when he leaves office. Now, Jack Smith relied on the opinion of lawyers within the department who said that they thought it was required by the Constitution to dismiss the case, but it isn't required by the Constitution. There's nothing that would interfere with his performance of the office, whether the case is dismissed without prejudice or merely postponed. So I think this is a serious mistake by the department. It compounds the mistake that you alluded to, which is they waited a year before they even brought this case forward or began the investigation. And then you have the Supreme Court with its immunity decision, and now you have a potential nominee in Pam Bondi who is saying she's going to prosecute the prosecutors. All of that goes against what Jack Smith said in his brief motion, which is that no one's above the law. So we're hearing that phrase a lot, but we're not giving validity to it by these actions.
Now, this is such this is pretty significant that you think it's you have kind of a different interpretation than what the Department of Justice advised Jack Smith and his team to do. One of the arguments that he also has been making, according to Department of Justice reporters, is that Trump's team would have just come in and they would have fully dismissed it outright anyway, and that this allows him to frame it in that the facts of the case haven't changed. Do you agree with that, or you think that's not a good enough?
No, I don't agree with that. First of all, yes, Trump's appointees would come and they would move to dismiss the case, but the court would make the decision as to whether it should be dismissed or whether it should be postponed. There's another principle of the law that says you don't get to be your own judge and jury. So if Donald Trump can appoint a prosecutor to be his judge and jury and effectively order him to dismiss the case, that runs afoul of that principle, too. But even if he were successful and a court were to grant that motion, then that's on Donald Trump. It's not on the department. And I think that's significant, too. So I think this compounds the mistake the department made by delaying so long before initiating the investigation of those who are higher up, like Donald Trump. And it just sets a terrible precedent that essentially the presidency of the United States is a get-out-of-jail-free card. That's not what that office is for.
One of the things that could have happened, and I realized I was working in the Biden administration at the time, but not for the Department of Justice, is there could have been a special prosecutor appointed on the first day, right? It's possible.
Yes.
Would that have made a difference?
Well, I think if Jack Smith had been appointed on the first day, it would have made a big difference because he moved with alacrity. You know, I have to give him credit. He moved with expedition. It was the department that didn't move quickly, except for the foot soldiers. It moved rapidly with those who broke into the Capitol, beat police officers, but it waited a long time, and in fact may have waited indefinitely if the January 6th committee hadn't brought all that evidence before the American people. It shouldn't take Congress to do that. They should have done that on their own.
You've referenced a couple of the things that could have been done differently in the past. And if you missed any, I do want you to share them. Looking forward, we're not guaranteed there won't be. I mean, Trump is going to be president, but there won't be another figure who tries to test the system in this way. Are there things, you're a senator-elect, you don't know what committees you'll be on yet, but that you wish that the Senate or Congress would do to better protect and prevent this type of activity from happening in the future?
There are a number of things. In fact, we put a package together called the Protecting Our Democracy Act, which got through the House, but we weren't able to get through the Senate last session. But it won't get through this Republican House and Senate, and so we won't be able to reestablish those guardrails. What we're really going to depend on is whether Republican senators in particular will demonstrate the willingness to uphold the checks and balances in our system. We'll give meaning to that advise and consent process. We'll hold the administration accountable. The track record is not particularly encouraging if you look at the first 4 years of Donald Trump. But the rejection of Matt Gaetz does give us room for hope that the Senate on both sides of the aisle may come to agreement that we need certain guardrails or we're going to head too far in the direction of autocracy.